Dispatch columnist, distributor, the Big 550, KTRS. Good morning, Tony Messenger.
Good morning, McGraw. How are you today?
We're doing great. And news overnight that the SCSTL MLS soccer group has congratulated Eric Greitens on some type of path forward with the group to advance their goal of bringing Major League Soccer to downtown St. Louis. That's part of their statement. So it looks like Greitens is trying to figure out a way around his millionaire for billionaires comment?
Yeah, I sort of expected he was going to have to find a way to do that, and not just because of the soccer stadium, but most of this state's economic development involves welfare for millionaires. I mean, that's what our economic development plan is. And unless he's going to completely undo all of the economic development deals that are in the works, then he's going to have to find some nuance. So my guess is, and I don't know, I haven't gotten any details from the soccer folks yet, my guess is that the governor makes some sort of commitment to clean up that land that MoDOT has, the old intersection there at 40 and Chestnut, and just say, that's our responsibility. We're gonna clean that site up, and what MoDOT does with it or what the city does with it, they do with it. And he will be able to legitimately say he's not paying for a stadium with state tax dollars. He's merely preparing land for economic development.
It looks like
that's my guess, but yeah. I don't know that that's the deal.
It looks like they're inching forward. It looks like this might actually become a reality.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would guess they're going to get the votes on the Board of Aldermen simply because it's fairly easy as an elected official to make a vote that puts something on a ballot. You can always argue, hey, I wasn't in favor of the soccer stadium. I just wanted you to vote on it.
Right.
And that's a fairly easy place to go from an elected official standpoint. And keep in mind, from the beginning, the mayor has tried to, even though he's been very careful with his language to keep them separate, the soccer and the transit pieces are sort of connected at the hip here. And a whole lot of people want to see that transit piece pass, even though it isn't an entirely cooked process either. I mean, everything's being rushed here a little bit, but generally speaking, in my experience, when I see things like this being rushed at the last minute, it tells me that they have the votes to get it done if they just get it to the full Board of Aldermen.
Tony, you were there for their Governor Greitens State of the State speech. What were your thoughts as you watched that?
It was interesting. I mean, part of it's confusing. You have a governor, even though you have a governor who's a Republican and an entire legislative body who's a Republican. I mean, literally, the Democrats meet in a phone booth practically. It wasn't the kind of state of the state that you might expect out of a Republican talking to a Republican body, because he ran against the very people that he's serving with now. And his first priority is cleaning up the ethics in that place. And so the very beginning of his speech is an implication that says some of you are the problem. And so it was a little bit muted. He gave the Republicans a lot of red meat on, I'm going to sign right to work, and we're going to clean up those evil trial lawyers and some of the stuff that Republicans traditionally campaign on. In that sense, it was a very insiderish speech from somebody who portrays himself as an outsider. There were a couple of interesting pieces. He did talk about tax credit reform in a very serious way, and he talked about a reform to the state's safety net policies, food stamps, TANF, those types of things, but not in a way that Republicans typically talk about it. He talked about the kinds of people that I've written about before who are on food stamps, on child care subsidy, and they get a promotion. They're working people. They get a promotion, but they don't make very much. but that little increment that they get in a promotion causes them to lose all their aid, and they actually lose money by doing well because we don't have a system that helps them as they're trying to help themselves. And he talked about that in probably the most specific part of his speech as it relates to policy, and suggests the fix. He doesn't specifically talk about the fix, but the proper fix for the problem he's talking about is redoing welfare programs so that people are stepped off of the aid instead of just taken off of it right away as they gain a little bit more extra income but are still living in poverty. That's a really important thought that if he's serious about it, a lot of Democrats are going to support, and I think he'll have a hard time getting that through a Republican legislature.
You know, you talk about those things, and many people hear welfare and aid, state aid, and everyone thinks inner city. But take a look at rural Missouri, which is hurting big time. It is many of those people that are voting for those Republicans in rural Missouri that would be helped by something like that.
Almost every county that voted for Eric Greitens in big numbers has poverty that as a percentage is as bad as some of the poverty in inner city St. Louis. It just looks different. It looks different in color. It looks different in how it affects the community because the rural poverty is so spread out and often it's hidden. So if he actually addresses that issue in a meaningful way, I say more power to him. I'd like him to stop using some of the dog whistle language that I think he sometimes uses because it helps him in rural Missouri. If he's going to attack a problem, let's attack it. Let's unify this state and use the kind of language that brings us together. The other reason, McGraw, that the speech was still muted is he did something no governor's ever done before, at least in my understanding of history. He gave his State of the State without presenting a budget. And so much of his rhetoric is meaningless as we're waiting for the actual budget, which indicates a true governor's priorities, especially in the situation he's facing where he's going to have to cut hundreds of millions of dollars because the Republicans gave him a bad budget. That's when the real rubber hits the road, and that's going to happen sometime in the next couple of weeks.
Tony Messenger, I was talking to somebody who put this theory out, and I'll ask you the theory that they put towards me, and that was that the Republican legislature loaded up the budget with all sorts of extra money that they knew the state was not going to have because the legislature doesn't have to pass a balanced budget, but the governor has to make a balanced budget. And so they wanted to put in popular programs that the state couldn't afford so that Koster, a Democrat, had to look bad cutting popular programs. And whoops, Koster loses, Greitens wins, and their torpedo that was meant for Koster is now going to hit Greitens.
I believe at least that's true with some of the lawmakers. I believe some of the lawmakers believe their own press releases when they issued them last year and said, we passed a balanced budget, despite the fact that the budget experts and the governor was telling them, no, you didn't. Because lawmakers have a very hard time saying no. And this is the difference between the governor's seat and being an elected lawmaker who represents one district. The buck stops with the governor, and when you have to cut the budget, that's when it's tough. And so I don't care how much of an outsider you are, when you have to cut money for schools, and the governor's already done that. He cut somewhere in the range of $60 to $80 million for higher education. He cut bus transportation money that's going to affect local school districts. He cut teacher training money already. These are real things that the governor has to do. The Constitution demands that he do it. But if he's just going to cut and not look for any revenue in a state that has some of the lowest taxes and lowest tax burden in the nation, then we're not going to get anywhere. And it's interesting that the one thing he didn't talk about, well, there's a few things, but one of the main things he didn't talk about in his speech, he didn't talk about roads. He didn't talk about transportation. That's been one of the main themes of legislative talk over the last few years is what are we going to do about our road problem in the state of Missouri? He didn't even talk about it. I think it's because he knows the state's broke.
Tony Messenger, St. Louis Post-Dispatch columnist, contributor here Tuesdays and Thursdays. Tony, drive safe. Thanks for checking in.
Thank you very much.
Yep, there you go. 828, Big 550.